Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here. We're going to give everybody a chance to join, and then we'll get started. Well, folks are coming in. Just get a chance to get comfortable, take a deep breath. We're hearing how challenging this time is, how challenging this last year and a half have been, 2 years, third winter. Are we in the third? I don't even know how long this has been. But we're so glad you're here. All right, we've got a great group of you assembled. Really pleased to see the interest. My name is Heather Zessiger, and I'm the Deputy Director for the American College Health Association's CoVAC project, which, as you may know, is the campus COVID-19 vaccination and mitigation initiative. And we are we're funded by the CDC to do this work with all of you. And I'm thrilled to have Hannah Hickman with us today with our partner YMC. She is the Digital Marketing Director, and I'll let her introduce herself and share her wisdom. We will take questions throughout. I may post some resources in the chat. You're also welcome to use the Q&A function if you'd like. So Hannah, I turn it over to you.
All right, hello everybody. It's very nice to see everybody, or rather know that you guys are here. So I'm with YMC. We are a full service marketing and communications agency that we focus on millennials and Gen Z, how to communicate with them, how to make genuine connections, engaging, authentic, and relevant campaigns for associations, organizations, companies, and consumer brands. My name is Hannah Hickman. As Heather said, I am the Digital Marketing Director at YMC, and I'm very excited to be here today. Also with me in this presentation will be Molly. Molly, can you speak, or can we hear you?
I'm working to add her. Yeah, here we go.
Okay. So just to go into what we're talking about today, we're just going to give you a big overview on Gen Z, the newest kids on the block. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Utilize the raise hand feature, which is in the bottom of your screen with all the panels. We're really excited to work with you guys today. So we can get Molly to say hi real quick.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I got speaking permission, so thanks for that. Really great to be here, and we're excited to get into this. Welcome.
So Molly is one of my coworkers. I'm very excited to dive in. So before we all start, I'm just going to do a quick quiz. Don't worry, you won't be graded. Make sure you type your responses in the chat. We'll give you guys a few seconds to start doing this. So our first question, what year was the incoming freshman class born? So this is going to be the class of 2026. Were they born in 1991, 2001, 2004, or 2010? So I'll give you guys a few seconds to throw that in the chat. All right, so we'll be ready for the answers. So the incoming freshman year class of the class of 2026 was born in 2004. So that seems basically like yesterday. This is the same year that Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban came out. So something that you will remember very well, and the current class might not remember at all. Another question. What is the top social media website of 2021? And by top, we're referring to the most used website by number of users. So was it Facebook? Was it TikTok, Twitter, or Pinterest? And you could throw those in the chat as well. The answer might surprise you. It might not if you've been keeping up with the news and social media trends and young people. Okay, the answer for the top social media website of 2021 TikTok. So TikTok has absolutely skyrocketed in popularity in the past year, becoming the top social media website slash app. It overtook Facebook for the first time ever since this really has been being tracked. TikTok also surpassed Google as the most trafficked website of 2021, which is fairly substantial. So we're going to take a few seconds right now. We're going to write some things down. Feel free to write it on a piece of paper, your computer, or you can just keep these in your head. So what are some of the top words and phrases that come to mind when you think of Generation Z? This can be based on your own interactions, your own feelings, observations, things you've read, anything. So we're going to come back together in about 2 minutes. So start thinking about that. Keep it pretty basic or as deep as you'd like, and we'll discuss that in a second. As some of you guys are still thinking and everything, I'm gonna just start reading through some of the things because you guys are putting some great things in there. We saw us, a really popular mobile game, and still is a little bit popular among the younger students. Creative, anxiety, social justice, passionate, open, empathetic, climate change again, which is a really good one. Inclusive, grew up during a recession, coming of age during a pandemic. Creative again, digital, significantly COVID impacted, mental health minded, angry, I do like seeing that one, stress driven, resilient, tech savvy, fast processors, want to stand out, instant information, inquisitive, technology, immediate gratification, mental health again, that was a really good one. That's something that we've seen a lot and we'll talk about in a little bit. Zoom classes, which I'm sure is something that we're all familiar with, short attention span, entitled, anxiety, again, with that anxiety, socially anxious, climate conscious. So it seems like a lot of us are in the same state of mind. Snowplow parenting. I actually don't think I've heard that one before, but that's very interesting. It seems like a lot of us have the same state of mind. Aware, climate aware, anxious, growing up during some very crazy times. Tech is a big thing that we want to point out here. So let's dive into a little bit of what we're talking about. If anybody also wants to use the raise hand feature and talk a little bit through more of what they've come up with, I'm very happy to talk through that as well. Oh, my audio. Okay, so sorry in case anyone did not hear what I just said. If anybody would like to use the raise hand feature, that would also work. It looks like I might be having some audio issues. So let me switch to my phone.
So I can talk a little bit while Hannah is figuring out her phone. So we can discuss just generally who is Gen Z. So this is the generation that was born roughly between 1997 and 2012. So they will soon be the largest generation in terms of numbers in the United States. And there's a couple of really interesting things about this group. They're the first digital natives, which means they grew up with technology, you know, as a part of their coming of age story, and it's really second nature to them. Millennials got this experience of technology, that is, in sort of real time as it was developing. By the time that Gen Z was really coming up, technology was already deeply ingrained in society. So they have kind of a different relationship with technology than we do. And they've only really known that way of life. Hannah, are you back online? Okay. So then another really interesting point or piece to point out, excuse me, was that they grew up post 9/11. They have lived through several economic recessions, international conflicts, and rapidly changing social norms. So they are immensely involved in social change, and they have experienced a lot of economic turmoil and are really kind of adaptive for these reasons. They also have a resulting high awareness in things like technology and specifically tech security, privacy. Climate change is a really big piece, which we'll talk about a lot throughout this presentation. Similarly, social issues, which includes racial issues, economic inequality, etc. And then, of course, mental health, which I know a couple of people called out in kind of our quick words and phrases piece too. So really fun to see that there's already a great understanding there. They use mostly social media as a form of shopping, which is also really interesting tie-in to kind of how they're consuming with their relationship with tech. So 97% say that they have used or do use social media for shopping inspiration. They're also largely urban, so only 13% of Gen Z individuals live in rural areas. And another interesting call out is that more than 1 in 4 Gen Zs identify as Hispanic. So I think, Hannah, we can move on to the next slide.
Hi all, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that for the little technology issues. But yes, we'll move on to the next slide. Thank you, Molly, for taking over.
Yeah, no problem.
So for our next slide, we're just going to go a little bit into just the general profile of Gen Z, and Molly's also going to take us in.
Yeah, so a couple of the key elements of the Gen Z persona. We'll start with the fun stuff. So their top music choices are Olivia Rodrigo, BTS, and other K-pop, Ariana Grande, Machine Gun Kelly. And another fun piece is that they are not afraid of oldies. So, you know, feel-good music from the 70s, 80s, and 90s is having a real moment of resurgence right now, especially on platforms like TikTok. And then this is also reflected in their, you know, fashion and beauty style. So kind of a vintage throwback aesthetic is in, specifically Y2K, which I think is hilarious. So this includes crop tops, chunky sneakers, loose-fitting mom jeans, and bucket hats. So bright colors and fun patterns, and comfort is key in terms of Gen Z fashion. And then an interesting call out is that their screen time is constant. The average Gen Z owns 5 different screens, so laptops, phones, tablets, TVs, etc. And they very frequently use more than one at a time. And again, this is a highly diverse generation. Less than 52% of Gen Z in the United States is white, which is staggering when you compare it to the silent generation, which is our current oldest living generation, who is 79% white in the United States. So 52 to 79 across the 4 or 5 most recent generations is a pretty huge gap. And over half the individuals in the United States who identify as mixed race are a Gen Z individual, which is interesting because at this time, there aren't a huge portion of the population. But racial isn't the only kind of form of diversity in this group. They are also the queerest generation of all time in the United States. 1 in 6 Gen Zs identify as queer, which is a massive jump even just from millennials. So we're not talking baby boomers or Gen X, like even just the generation a little bit, their seniors, answered 1 in 10 as identifying as queer, excuse me. So the jump to 1 to 6 is pretty significant. Okay. They're also very conscious of their physical and mental health. So from a physical standpoint, there's been a breakdown in toxic diet culture and more of an emphasis on accessible, regular, and attainable workouts. And another big piece of this is body positivity. There's a big movement of body acceptance and body positivity happening in this age group. And from a mental health standpoint, this is a therapy generation. 37% of this group says that they have gone or do go to therapy, which isn't a huge jump from millennials, because millennials were at 35. But what's interesting is when you get to Gen X, that's 26, baby boomers is at 22, and the silent generation is at a staggering 15%. So again, from these 4 or 5 generations, we are seeing the number of people who go to therapy double and then some. And they're ethical consumers. So, 82% of them say that, 65% of them say that they would like to learn the origin of anything that they buy before they buy it. So this includes where it's made, who made it, what they were paid to make it, what their living conditions and working conditions are. These are things that are really important to Gen Zs, and 80% of them say that they would refuse to buy goods from a company that's involved in a scandal. And this isn't just a humanitarian issue. Clearly, climate change is another really important social justice issue for Gen Zs, who again report that 73% said that they would be willing to pay more for a product option that was more sustainable. They're also clearly very politically active. 70% of Gen Zs polled wanted an activist government, and they are very involved in politics for their age group. They contact representatives, they sign petitions, start their own petitions, generally raise awareness. And some causes that are near and dear to their hearts include racism, sexism, climate change, which we've talked about, and a lot more. And another interesting point in terms of their political activism is that they are far less likely to identify as either Republican or Democrat. So we're seeing them collectively step away from those labels, which is really interesting when you put it in perspective that 1 in 10 eligible voters in the 2020 presidential election was a Gen Z voter. So they are clearly very capable of making waves politically, and they are doing so. And then lastly, they're optimistic. I know that a lot of us might take a quick glance and consider this a very pessimistic group of people. I think that stems from the fact that they are so well educated and receive a lot of insight and are very attuned to what's happening in the world. But the flip side of that is that they are not only presented with the issues that they're facing, but also the solutions. And they are confident that they can employ those solutions as a generation. Studies say that 82% of Gen Z says that they are optimistic about the future. And this is in terms of individual career goals, finance goals, et cetera, but then also the collective global issues and social challenges too. Any questions about kind of the Gen Z profile before we move on? Or any of these little bubbles we want to talk about more, get some clarity on?
So I see we have a question from a few questions actually. So let's go to Leslie, their view of organized religion. I think that's a great question. So Gen Z is actually more religious than their previous generation for millennials. Millennials tend to be very disenfranchised by religion, especially with increasingly more progressive views. However, Gen Z has very much returned to that for a sense of community, for a belief system. However, they are also pushing change within the religious institution, making their congregations have a set standpoint on social issues, on becoming more activist, more inclusive. But it is something that we are seeing an increase of Gen Z joining congregations of all different denominations, different religions, and so forth, and also seeking out different religions from the one they were potentially raised in. Leah asked for our sources for this data. We actually are going to be sharing a handout list of a bunch of different sources that we've used, but these are all things that we've researched through various different organizations. We saw McKinsey is one of the big ones. You'll see that also later, but we all have sources that you guys can utilize later and also explore. I also see that we had a raised hand before. I don't know where that went though. I think it was Connie. Give me 1 second, Connie. I'll allow you to talk. There we go.
Oh, Connie said that it was an accident. She was clicking it
Oh.
off, I think.
Okay, no worries. I will take you off then. Thank you.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you guys so much. Give me 1 second. There we go. All right, so let's dive into just how is Gen Z different? So Molly, you're gonna take this as well.
Yeah, so an interesting fact is that the average Gen Z has an 8-second attention span compared to the 12-second attention span that millennials have. And again, this is because we are two generations of individuals constantly receiving new information and new forms of media. Around half of Gen Z belongs to a racial or ethnic minority group. They are the last group in the United States that will be predominantly white, and they are very aware of it. We also alluded to this a little bit before, but they are very educated. So 57% of Gen Z is enrolled in a post-high school education. And interestingly, this isn't just traditional colleges and universities. It's actually also, we're seeing a huge increase in enrollment at trade schools, which I think is incredible. They also have similarly a significantly lower dropout, high school dropout rate than the previous generations. And they are more progressive. I know that we've talked about this a little bit too, but they are really progressive on social issues and financial issues. And even those Gen Zs who identify as more right-leaning tend to have progressive views, especially in terms of climate change and income inequity. And again, this is all reflected in how they interact with society. So they're looking to have a meaningful impact with their jobs, with their consumption habits. They're looking to make a difference in societal issues. And that could be directly or indirectly, but that is a priority for this group.
All right, thank you, Molly. And just definitely want to also touch on that fact that they're more progressive than previous generations. We did talk about how Gen Z does not like to identify necessarily as Democratic or Republican. However, they do still hold these beliefs that they are on one side of the aisle or the other. However, they like using some different labels. They don't believe that the party necessarily aligns with their beliefs, but that is something that is very important to them. On to the next slide. How does Gen Z communicate?
All right, so 60% of Gen Z prefers to communicate via digital messaging. And just to be clear, this does not mean that in-person conversations are moot. It just means that you'll probably have a better conversation with the Gen Zer via text than via phone call. They prioritize authentic and meaningful interactions. So pretty much small talk is out and vulnerability is in. And this doesn't just apply to friends. This is, again, what they're looking for from their employers, from their brands, etc. And as a fun note here, emojis are totally still in for anyone who's keeping track. Definitely a great way to indicate tone and kind of what your intention is with a message, because it is sometimes difficult to read that, that kind of thing on a dry message. But we would recommend doing a quick Google check if there's a new emoji, because that might not mean what you think it means. But Gen Zs do really want to support brands that communicate their values. Values are something that they feel really strongly about and are looking for the way that they interact with society to reflect their own personal values. So they make a strong stance, and they will cut off companies or organizations that they feel don't align with how they view the world. And a big part of this is inclusive language. So this is something really important to this group. Again, they're highly diverse, you know, gender, sexual orientation, and sexuality. You know, they're paying attention to how these issues are treated by companies and organizations. And 76% demand that a brand promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you know, this pertains not just to marketing materials like a commercial, it also pertains to internal leadership. So Gen Zs are looking for companies to kind of put their money where their mouth is and have a diverse leadership board, et cetera. And then on the flip side, this applies to job hunting. So 79% of 2020 graduates entering the workforce ranked a company's diversity measures as quote unquote very important. And so sites like Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Indeed often offer features to help job seekers identify a company that values diversity in their workforce. And Gen Zs will almost always consult this kind of site and might actually even seek out reviews specifically from people of color to explain their own experience of diversity and inclusion at that organization.
Okay,
Any
so why are
questions
we
about kind of, ooh, sorry, I just want to give everyone a minute to ask if there's any questions about kind of what makes them tick, how they communicate and that kind of thing before we move on.
Feel free to use the chat or the Q&A feature. You can use the raise hand feature also. That works best for you. Give it a second. All right. And yes, we are going to be sharing a recording. So if you are coming in late or you have to leave early, not a big deal. You'll be able to catch up. We'll also be sharing a handout and a copy of this presentation. All right. So why are we talking a lot about work? So Gen Z is entering the workplace. They are on track to become the largest population by number in general, by the largest generation. And in the workplace, they're going to make up a majority of it by at least by 2030. In this chart, as you can see, the workplace demographics have shifted very drastically over the years, especially as people age, they retire, people enter the workforce. In the next, I was going to say 10 years, but it looks like 8 years now for 2030, it looks like Gen Z is going to be making up the majority of the workforce. Baby boomers will largely be disappearing from there due to retirement. Gen X is also going to be heading towards retirement, and we're also going to see the entrance of Generation Alpha. So those are people who are in elementary and middle school right now, even those just being born. So the workforce is going to look very, very different, very, very soon. So Gen Z in the workplace. So they've already started to work for a while now. Most of them are in their early 20s in college. It's a very big likelihood that you have already started working with younger people. They are a whole new beast in the workplace. They are turning norms up on their head. They are demanding change, and they're really pushing change, even indirectly. So there was a big New York Times article recently that came out about Gen Z and their role in the workplace. They are pushing their organizations to try new things, change some longstanding policies, and encourage some new ways of working and thinking. As you all know, we've all been working remote for about 2 years now. But even before that, before the pandemic has forced some of that, Gen Z was also demanding a little bit more flexibility in their work. With that, the work-life balance is increasingly important to Gen Z. They want to be able to take the time off that they have. They want to be able to turn off their computers at the end of the day, not respond to a message, and be able to come to work fully refreshed. That having that balance is very, very important, and that's something that we're seeing a big trend in, especially overseas, where countries like France are passing laws where your employer can't text you after work hours. So Gen Z is also, they're digital natives, as we said. They have only ever known technology. They grew up with high-speed internet, smartphones, tablets, touchscreens, all that fun stuff. And they want to see this in their workplace and in their work. 90% of Gen Z says that the tech used in their workplace will have an influence on where they choose to work. This doesn't necessarily mean that everyone wants to work on the top technology, NFTs, Bitcoin, fun stuff like that, those little buzzwords. But it does mean that when they go in the workplace, they do expect to have access to things that are going to make their work easy, accessible, and familiar. Gen Z is also really creating leadership in the workplace, both in a few different forms. This can be formally or informally. This can mean in terms of promotions, supervising others, leading projects, committees, things like that. Or it could be a little bit more informal, like leading a meeting, coming with some ideas and having those heard. So Gen Z really wants the chance to express themselves, and they do want to push the fact that seniority doesn't necessarily mean leadership, or does not necessarily mean because they're so young in the workforce that what they are saying doesn't matter. So they are trying to assert themselves in that way. So Gen Z, so we said 81% of Gen Z aspires to be a leader. As you said, formal, informal, this can mean a few different things, but there is a desire to establish themselves in the workplace and beyond. So communication in the workplace has also changed very much with the entrance of Gen Z. Gen Z said they'd rather communicate in person in the workplace when possible with managers, as opposed to emailing or instant messaging. This isn't something that is necessarily going to be a tried and true fact. It's very situation dependent, it's varied, it's person dependent. It can also mean that it's a faster interaction if it's a quick thing. However, the Slack, email, IM all do have a big place in the workplace. And I think this is also a very interesting stat. 93% of Gen Z says that a company's impact on society affects their decision to work there. So this doesn't necessarily mean they want to be doing great work on the ground every single day, but it does mean that their company's values do matter to them a lot, whether they donate, whether they are polluting, whether they are ensuring that their work is aligning with their social values. So
Great.
Molly's going to talk about working with Gen Z.
Yeah, so again, Hannah mentioned that they really do crave opportunities to lead. So a couple of examples again are leading a campaign, spearheading an initiative, welcoming input and ideas from your Gen Z coworkers. And again, despite preferences for an online communication, don't be afraid to approach them. They do talk in person, and one-on-one communication is very valuable to this group of people. So that's kind of something that it might seem like you are limited in your communication, but that isn't actually the case. They very much welcome person-to-person contact and communication. Another value that they have is the opportunity to learn and grow. So this translates really directly to mentorships. They're highly valued by this group, and that's something that is a strong desire from potential or already existing Gen Z employees. So even if a person is not able to serve as a direct or traditional mentor, setting them up with chances to be mentored by others or even participate in like one-off learning experiences is something that's going to sign really well with Gen Z.
So I just want to go to the chat to answer Valerie's question. In the Q&A, she says, does the digital communication preference impact Gen Z's ability to develop soft skills? With that, that's actually something that's being very much studied right now, especially with Zoom being in the workplace, also in classrooms. There is some fear that this is going to impact leadership skills, communication skills, but I think that might be more of a symptom of the pandemic as a larger focus item rather than digital communication. Gen Z is really good at switching between communication modes, between texting a friend and texting a supervisor, and then slacking a coworker, and then having a quick meeting with their boss. So they have that ability to kind of switch, be a chameleon, and very quickly. However, there is definitely some concern going forward, especially with the people who are still in elementary, middle, high school, and that is something that we're going to have to see a little bit more in the future. However, as we talked about with the mentor and the advising part, if you're able to play that role, you're going to do amazing work, being sure that these students and these young people have these soft skills and can succeed in the workplace, even in the face of all these rapidly changing norms.
Yeah, I also will just add to that by saying that I think a lot of the soft skills that the workplace values right now will have a shift that will align with the soft skills that the current Gen Z students are developing. So Hannah touched on how different the workplace will look in the next coming years. And I think that instead of thinking about how this generation isn't aligning themselves with the skills we expect right now with how the workplace looks today, isn't probably the best way to kind of assess how effective they will be when they assume the leadership in the workplace. I think the workplace will adapt and change with them. Okay. So similarly, 40% of Gen Z say they want daily interactions with their supervisors. So a lot of times they might think that something's wrong if this doesn't happen. And this doesn't have to be a formal or drawn out or, like formal review. It can just be a quick hello, let them know if you're available or not, and go over priorities for the day. We just want to make sure that we have a very inquisitive tone and not necessarily a tone that seems overbearing or critical.
Yeah, we did touch a lot on the anxiety and the mental health awareness of Gen Z. And with that, it is sometimes just a quick hello, let them know that you're still know that they exist, still know that everything is good. Just something quick hello, an emoji, something like that's a good way to indicate that you're still there, you want to interact, everything's open and good, and communication is good. So managing Gen Z, a lot of you guys are probably already started managing Gen Z or working with Gen Z. It's going to look a little different than managing previous generations. So Gen Z is coming into the workplace with new ideas, expectations, new life experiences. It's very important to be open to listening to these and implementing them. Gen Z will make up a majority of the workplace in the coming years, and giving them the opportunity to contribute to shaping those workplaces is very important. In the same way that Gen Z likes getting feedback, they want to make sure that's frequent, ongoing. They don't want to necessarily wait for a formal review. I know a lot of companies have formal review processes, either quarterly, yearly, bi-yearly. They would kind of like that more in live time. So say they submit writing and there's some issues with that, they'd rather hear about the issues now and how they can work to improve that now than in a few weeks or a month or however long it might take. Waiting for that formal review is also very anxiety inducing. We talked about the anxiety associated with Gen Z. So having that is going to be very important. And in the same way that Gen Z likes getting feedback, they're also more likely to give feedback as well to their supervisors. They're going to tell their supervisors like, hey, I really like the way you do this, or hey, could we try something different because this doesn't work for me? When you're managing someone who is a little bit younger, be open to hearing that and working together to ensure that you can have that really healthy working relationship. So part of incorporating that new generation is being willing to try some new things. Gen Z is coming in with a different life experience, with new eyes, a fresher education. Not everything is going to work that they're going to suggest, and I think that is completely fine. Not every idea needs to work. Sometimes failures happen, mistakes happen. These are great learning opportunities, especially if you're trying out brand new technology, a new social media platform, trying a new thing that they may have learned at a previous internship, job, and so forth. Having these opportunities to try new things, to either have them succeed or do nothing or fail, is a great learning opportunity, not just for your younger people, but for your entire organization. And in light of Gen Z, they also, unlike previous generations, not overly keen to job hop. That is something that we've talked a lot about in general workplace discussions. Job hopping is an expectation rather than something that is rare. With that, Gen Z wants to stay in the workplace for longer. They want stability. They want the ability to move up within an organization. However, with that, they expect a little bit to go both ways. They want to have advancement. They want to have clear career opportunities. And if they are not having that promotions, the advancement, the raises, the opportunity to increase their skill set, they will leave for greener pastures. Also, when managing Gen Z, the communication, we've touched on that before, they want to talk to their employers. They want to talk to the bosses during career hours. Email is very effective and long-lasting. I think we've been talking about the death of email since email was invented. It's not going anywhere. It's great for longer communication, more formal things, projects. Instant messaging is also very good with Google Hangouts and Slack. It's great for quick questions, comments, and formal chats. I think it's also fine to be in the workplace and to say, hey, how are you? Gen Z likes that. They're bringing their entire selves to work. Texting is also something that's becoming an increasing norm in the workplace. Gen Z is expecting to get texted by their boss, by their coworkers for questions, especially considering the remote work environment. As we said before, the work-life balance piece is very important. So if you are going to be texting someone that you're managing, Gen Z or otherwise, just be very careful of the timing, ensure that you're not encroaching on any time off that they might have, and also just be a little prepared to for your expectations to not be met in terms of timing and response if it's at an inconvenient hour or something that's outside the workplace norms. So managing, part of that is also motivating and incentivizing Gen Z. Oh, I do see that we have one question. Never mind, thank you, Valerie. To do this, you might need to take a different approach than you have for different generations. They want clear goals and timelines. They want to know that they need to achieve X, Y, and Z before they can move on to the next thing. They want to know that you have a clear goal in mind. They have something to achieve at some point. For example, for a promotion, the federal government employee step ladder is kind of really good with that, saying like after X amount of time, you will get this promotion, this raise, X, Y, and Z. We're not expecting anything that formal from normal employers, for non-government employers, but having those kinds of conversations are very good to not only mentor, but also to make sure that your employee has that investment from you guys. Knowing their motivations is also very important. Gen Z is very motivated by opportunities for advancement. 34% say that that is what's going to keep them in a job and keep them working harder. And it's followed by more money, 27%, and then meaningful work at 23. So of course, money is very important. We're in a time of a lot of economic inequality. They want to know what their wages are. They want transparency with that, especially the promotions and such. And meaningful work. They want to make sure the work that they're doing is contributing to not just society, but to their company, to the larger mission of what you're doing. They don't want busy work. And with that, it's also having the work-life balance. They want clear expectations. They want time off, a clear and set schedule. They want to know their benefits. They want everything spelled out. I think that's important for everyone in the workplace, but that is something Gen Z is really pushed for. And then transparency is also very important for all organizations, but especially for Gen Z. Having straightforward, predetermined compensation structures are highly valued. Compensation for even unpaid and volunteer workers that you might be working, especially in college, can be talked about in terms of free food, access to events, learning opportunities, connections, networking, and all that fun stuff. But being sure that you can talk about where your organization is, where you're going, what you want, what the future holds is very important to set expectations and retain those employees. So Molly's going to talk a little bit more of some of these top stats.
Sorry, everybody, I was on mute. Yeah, we're going to run through some quick stats. 64% of Gen Z cited opportunity for growth as a top career priority. And fascinatingly, at least to me, only 3% cited an impressive job title as a priority for them in the workplace. 20% said that they would rather go to the dentist than have their boss check in on them frequently. And this might sound a little contradictory to what we were saying earlier about daily check-ins and interactions. The key difference here is that, again, we want to make sure that we're not looking over their shoulder and micromanaging. But again, we're offering support, asking questions, and helping them prioritize their work. And a really, I think, crucial part of this too would be to talk it through with your Gen Z employees. Ask them at the top of their employment what their communication cadence preferences are. Establish that kind of communication and reestablish it frequently. Make sure that it's still working for them, or if it's not working for them any longer, if there's something that you need to do to adjust your communication. Again, it's kind of a delicate balance, but the one thing that Gen Z is pretty clear on is that they are very honest in what they expect and what they prefer. So when in doubt, that's always a great fallback. And then lastly, 32% expect to manage employees in the next 5 years. So we've talked about a couple of times how they really are craving leadership, and they do expect to manage employees in the corporate environment in the next couple of years. All right, so we talked a lot about how work-life balance is highly important to this generation, and we want to talk about a couple of tangible ways to improve work-life balance. So essentially, this generation is not as desperate for a job coming into the workforce as millennials were. So the traditional 9 to 5 with minimal benefits and confusing benefits is just not going to work anymore. 37% of Gen Z cited flexible work hours as a big part of work-life balance. And then paid sick days, paid vacation days, paid mental health days were also very highly called out. But an interesting and important note here is that the paid vacation time isn't a matter of policy. So they're not just looking for the vacation time to be in their contract, they're looking for a company culture that allows and encourages them to take the time off. So it's a matter of practice, not only of policy.
All right, thank you so much, Molly. So yeah, we've talked a lot about managing Gen Z, and we also do understand that some of this is out of your control in terms of offering these benefits and everything, but they want to have that communication. They want to know where you're at. They want to be able to come to work, do the best work they can in a way that works for everybody. Also, Gen Z is very different from past generations in terms of they're bringing their entire selves to work. Previously, a lot of people have been told that, like, you have a personality at work, you have a personality at home, you have a personality with friends and family. That barrier has been broken down a little bit. Gen Z tends to bring their emotions to work, how they're feeling. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good way to set expectations. It's a good way to have motivated work. And it's something that should be encouraged because we are the same people regardless of where we are. And Gen Z is helping to really break down a lot of those barriers. So as we're nearing towards the end of our presentation, we would love to hear from you guys. We have, we'll give you guys about 2 to 3 minutes or so just to think about, probably not that long, talk about your own experiences working with Gen Z. What's worked for you? What are you still trying to figure out? Take a few minutes to figure this out. If you have any tips, if you have any questions, we're happy to workshop anything with you guys live as well. So in case you have questions that you really need some help with, we're very happy to tackle that. So throw your questions in the chat, throw your information in the Q&A. If you want to raise your hand, that will also work. I'm going to pull up the chat right now. So yes, the work-life balance trend is showing up a lot, especially in COVID outreach. Student reported using social media for fun and didn't expect to see university COVID information there, but she did remember it. So yeah, social media is second nature. Everybody has it. Everybody is using it. Use it for fun. I think it's very important to remember to have fun, but it's also a good place for you to share very vital information. I think we have a hand raised. Away. Okay, Valerie asked a really good question. Is Facebook relevant at all with Gen Z? It's a very, very mixed answer. So most of Gen Z does have a Facebook. They use it to log into other things though. They're not actually using it actively, or if they are using it, they're using it for family, not so much for fun, but they are using it, they have it. They're not using it as their primary social media platform, especially in the United States. That is a little different in other countries. I think it's worth having a presence on Facebook. I don't think it's worth investing too much in it. The other platforms that people are having better luck with, especially with Gen Z, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, all of that fun stuff. But yeah, Facebook, it's there. It's not overly relevant. It's really helpful to interact with parents though, or for someone who can tell Gen Z.
It's also, they use it a little bit just differently. So communication with people who maybe don't have a cell phone or live overseas, and there's like a kind of logistical communication barrier is a tool. So for that reason, Gen Zs will turn to Facebook as kind of a tool to address that. And then other features like groups and events and marketplaces. So Facebook really serves more of a utility for Gen Z than it does necessarily as like a general social media, hang out, have fun, learn more about your friends and followers, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Katya also just wrote that my kids, that is for parents only. It depends on how old these students are, but usually when students do get into college, that is when they'll make their first Facebook now, because it's a good way to get into those student groups, to get to housing, all the other fun stuff. In the chat, I've seen some really good insights as well. I noticed many Gen Z students have a wealth of experience that may make them eligible for professional positions even at a very young age. That's a really good thing to point out. Gen Z has been encouraged to take as many internships as possible, especially in urban universities. There are students as young as freshmen, their first semester, who have an internship. That's very valuable experience, especially considering internships are also making it a little bit easier for students not just to fetch coffee, but to actually do some real meaningful work. Definitely pay attention to that. They are bringing a lot of experience, especially if they've had multiple internships, so they get a really good view. And then I've also a lot of great comments on how Generation Z is advocating for healthier workplaces. That's something that's going to benefit everybody, and I think that's something we should all be open to. Taking your sick days, vacation days, benefits, and all that. Enrique had made a really good comment about the advancement of positive causes. Gen Z is very much championing those, and it's a very great thing. So I'm going to switch back and forth between chat and the Q&A. So Jack asked, how do Gen Z react to repeated communication, newsletters, this kind of thing? Do these become less effective over time, or do they need to be kept fresh to hold their attention? So we did talk about their Generation Z's attention span is shorter than millennials. They do fine with repeated communications. Newsletters have had this massive renaissance in the past 2 years. We are at quote unquote peak newsletter. You can see some articles in the New Yorker and the Cut about that. They like that. They like the repeated and ongoing conversation. It helps them build relationships. I think the important part of that is keeping the information fresh and visually appealing. If you're just writing a whole block of text, no one, regardless of generation, is going to read that. But keeping that information fresh, easy to read, bolding, good formatting, colors, it works fine, and it keeps also adding some personality as well, so you can connect with that. So yeah, repeated communications like newsletters and those kind of things, they're very effective, and there are something that, as long as they're interesting and fun, they will go very long for you. Right, back to the chat. I'm a millennial on the younger end, but I guess that's why I identified with a lot of the workplace goals and expectations. Yes, so millennials, definitely the younger millennials, are very much with Gen Z on a lot of the ways that they're viewing and thinking in the workplace. It just, Gen Z tends to be a little bit more bold. You'll see all on the memes and everything how Gen Z is terrified to make a doctor appointment, but they will yell at their boss if they see something unjust in the workplace. So there's definitely a good mix there. Tina wrote, is Gen Z open to learning health and medicine in a more holistic way? So Gen Z is very health focused, physical, mental, emotional. They're very open to a lot of different things. They understand that traditional medicine works for some, non-traditional, sometimes Eastern medicine does work for some others, holistic. They're very open. They'll listen to mostly anything, and whether they believe it or not depends on how effective you are showing things. But Gen Z is very open to learning about new things. They're very interested in being healthy and being taking care of themselves and all that fun stuff. Okay, back to the chat. This seems very basic, but are there any tips for communicating with Gen Z with signage? So signage is rough for everybody, especially right now. A lot of people aren't going out of the house. A lot of people are more on their phones when they're walking out and about, all that fun stuff. Signage can work. Simple, colorful attention grabbing is very, very helpful. No one wants to stand and reading something on a wall for 5 minutes. If you just have the most basic facts, the title, what they can do, how to get in touch, or even something that they could take with them, that's also very helpful. QR codes, they were actually on the way to being completely obsolete a few years ago. The pandemic has revived them. They're very, very helpful to use. Everyone's phone can scan them. Having a QR code to bring them to a digital resource is very effective. And in terms of just colors, make sure it's on brand, it's fun. No one wants to see Microsoft Word art anymore. Canva is a really good tool to designing fun and effective and very modern, free graphics and signage. Okay, so back to Q&A. I supervise student workers in a paid and volunteer position with both formal and informal leadership role. When soliciting feedback about our programming from Gen Z, we often encounter a reluctance to state an opinion. This doesn't seem to track with these traits, but given a tendency to disengage from an org and brand that doesn't align with values, I'm wondering if we should backtrack to trust and values alignment in order to get more engagement. So it depends how these feedback sessions are being held. If it's something that's in a group, it might be a little harder to say something, especially face-to-face, for fear of offending somebody, for fear of conflict or anything like that. Having something anonymous is usually very helpful. An online feedback form, if you can also just do over email or some sort of digital thing, it's a little bit easier to say an opinion when you don't have to see someone's reaction right in hand. It also gives people a little bit of time to think before they say something. Gen Z tends to be very, very conflict averse, so you have to be a little bit careful about that. But given the tendency to disengage from a brand that doesn't align with values, I think making sure that you can put that trust forward, the values forward, is very important. It can also encourage engagement. People want to see that the places that they're patronizing and giving money to, giving their time to, have good values, are aligning with them. So if you can really establish that, they're going to be more willing to work with you. Also, we did talk on leadership. Even with volunteer positions, if you can give someone the ability, like, hey, like, I see that you did really well with this, or like, hey, I see you don't like this. Do you have suggestions? Can you brainstorm for us? Having that, giving some of the power back to them, is going to incentivize them a lot more. Back to chat. 1 second. So how savvy are they in relation to misinformation? This is very, very great to ask. So misinformation is a rampant issue. Because Gen Z are digital natives, it's very mixed in terms of who can and who can't. Some people are very, very great in terms of detecting misinformation and shutting it down. Some of them not so much. It also depends on their education, all the other fun stuff. But for that, there's a lot of different resources available for misinformation. Library guides are probably one of the best. If you just search up library guide and misinformation, librarians have put together a great resource on how to detect this, how to talk about misinformation, what you should do when you see it, sharing it, and all the other fun stuff. So thank you so much for asking that. It's something that you have to be careful of. It's also GenZ is good for also a gut check occasionally as well. And then I see we have a few more Q&A. Oh, I work in a college health service clinic. Is printed material and education still effective? Yes. Like I said, they'll keep it simple, keep it visually appealing, make sure it's something that they can bring with them and throw in a bag. It's always good to have something visual because that's something that someone can pick up, put down, and see later. Whereas if I see an email, you might delete it and never see it again. So definitely effective. Just make sure that you have that right information and that you're posting it in the right place. Okay, other things that we see. Yes, GenZ is very busy. A lot of this has to do with expectations, college interns. A lot of people have internships and jobs plus classwork. They like getting involved. They're very passionate about a lot of different social causes. So you are going to see some of them stretched very thin. We're going to have actually a peer ambassador session on managing burnout and managing your time, because that is something that younger students, younger people do struggle with. But it is something that there's a big trend in talking about this kind of stuff, managing burnout, getting organized, time management. You're seeing it on social media, especially Instagram, Pinterest, all that other fun stuff. So that is been very busy, and that is something that you should keep in mind, especially if you are managing students, that they have a lot on their plate and that they like getting involved, however they might stretch themselves too thin. So setting time expectations are very helpful for that. As you could see that we have a Q&A over here, or rather a quick poll. So if you answer that when you get a chance, that'd be perfect. After this, we are going to send some resources around, a one-pager where you could find some really good resources on staying involved about learning about GenZ, any new information. There's some newsletters in there. We also have some good reports on just some of the information that we've talked about here, presented that, and we'll also make this presentation available. Do you have any other questions, comments, concerns, anything that you have? Questions about even just like GenZ slang. I know GenZ slang is very, it moves very quickly. So keep an eye on that. Make sure when you're using emojis, as we said, make sure they mean what they mean. One food might not actually mean food. It could be an innuendo. Urban Dictionary usually isn't, it's a good tool. I wouldn't rely on it exclusively. If you type in emoji meanings, you can usually find some good sources on that. Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for joining. Thank you for all your active participation. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions, you can reach out to ACHA, and then we will also be distributing our materials as well.
Thank
I
you
want to
so
thank
much, everyone,
YMC.
for the great chat box.
Yeah. Thank you, YMC, so much. Both Hannah and Molly and the whole team there. They have been such great partners in our work with the Backs Forward campaign, which you can find on our website. So I just want to really appreciate them and appreciate all of you for being here. Our next installment in this series will be on February 8th with an introduction to social media, strategies, tips, techniques, etc. So please join us again next month and invite your colleagues, your students. This is open to all campus personnel and students who want to communicate as best as possible around COVID mitigation and vaccination. Oh, Hannah, you're muted.
You're muted.
I believe that we are all done. I'm going to close out the session, which I believe will end it for everybody, but thank you guys so much and be on the lookout for the information.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
thank you.